The morning air was crisp, touched by the scent of salt and seaweed, and the faint hum of waves brushing against the wooden pillars of the pier. Every day at dawn, Clara Evans, a 27-year-old painter, walked there with her sketchbook tucked under her arm, seeking peace in the rhythm of the ocean. The world felt quiet in those hours, and she liked that, the stillness, the emptiness, the way the world forgot to rush. She had moved to the coastal town only 3 months ago, trying to mend the fractures left by a broken engagement that had drained her will to paint. The sea, she believed, would heal her. Its vastness made her pain feel smaller, and every morning, as she sat on her favorite wooden bench, she noticed him, a man who was always there before her. Sitting a few meters away, he was older, 58, perhaps 60, with silver hair that caught the sunlight and eyes that carried a deep stillness, like he'd seen the world too clearly and decided to sit down for a while. He always had the same object in his hands, a small leather-bound notebook, the corners worn soft by time. Sometimes he wrote in it, sometimes he simply stared at the sea as if waiting for something only he could see. For weeks, they never spoke. They just existed together in quiet routine, two lonely souls sharing the same sunrise. Clara would sketch the horizon, the gulls, the gentle tilt of his head when the wind caught his hair. She never meant to draw him, but somehow his stillness became part of every picture. There was a gravity about him, a story just beneath the surface that her artist's heart couldn't ignore. One morning, the tide was low, and the sunrise burned orange across the water. Clara was deep in a sketch when the wind caught her pages, scattering them across the pier. She gasped, chasing after the loose sheets, but one slipped right to his feet. He bent slowly, picked it up, and froze. It was a portrait of him. For the first time, their eyes met. His surprise softened into a faint, wistful smile as he studied the drawing. "You've captured the loneliness well," he said in a deep, calm voice. Clara blushed, caught off guard. I didn't mean to draw you, you just fit into the picture." He chuckled softly, the sound low and warm. "I suppose I've been part of this pier longer than I realized." They talked then, awkwardly at first, but with the gentle rhythm of two people who already understood silence. He introduced himself as Mr. Hale, a retired music teacher who came to the pier every morning out of habit. "My wife loved the sunrise," he explained quietly. "We used to watch it together. When she passed, I promised her I wouldn't stop coming." There was no pity in Clara's eyes, only understanding. "I come here for the same reason," she admitted. "To remember who I used to be before everything fell apart." They sat there as the sun climbed higher, two strangers bound by invisible threads of loss and longing. The morning felt different, softer, deeper. When she finally stood to leave, he handed her the drawing back with a small nod. "Keep it," he said. "But promise me one thing, don't stop drawing what you see." From that day on, their mornings changed. The silence remained, but it was no longer empty. It carried meaning, a quiet companionship that neither had expected, but both desperately needed. And so, every dawn thereafter, Clara walked to the pier not just to paint the sea, but to meet the man who seemed to belong to it. She didn't know it yet. But that single simple morning when the wind carried her sketches and he caught one was the beginning of something that would defy time itself. The mornings that followed slipped into a rhythm that neither Clara nor Mr. Hale dared to question. Every day she arrived just as the horizon began to glow, and he was already there, waiting, notebook in hand, a steaming cup of coffee beside him. Only this time there were 2 cups. "I didn't know if you take sugar," he said the first morning, offering her one with a gentle, uncertain smile. She laughed softly, her breath visible in the cool dawn air. "I take life as it comes, so I'll take coffee that way too." That became their ritual. They would sit in comfortable silence, sipping coffee as the sea whispered below. The pier creaked, gulls cried overhead, and the sun rose between them like a shared secret. Words were unnecessary, but slowly, over the days and weeks, they began to arrive. Clara learned that Mr. Hale had once been a music teacher, but not an ordinary one. In his youth, he'd composed songs that found small fame before tragedy silenced his passion. His wife, Eleanor, had been his muse, his singer, his light. When she died unexpectedly, he stopped composing. The notes felt hollow without her voice, he confessed one morning, staring out at the horizon. It's strange, isn't it? You can lose someone once to death, and then again every day after. Clara didn't interrupt. She knew that kind of ache, the kind that lingers quietly beneath the surface, showing itself only when something beautiful reminds you what's gone. In return, she told him about her own loss. Not death, but betrayal. Her fiancé had left her 2 weeks before their wedding. He'd fallen in love with someone else, someone less complicated. She had given up painting afterward, until she came to the sea and found herself sketching again without realizing why. Mr. Hale listened quietly, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he said something that stayed with her. Some people arrive in our lives just to break us open, but sometimes those cracks let the light in. Their conversations grew deeper. He spoke of music, she of art. He explained how melodies could hold memories. She confessed that her drawings often painted feelings she couldn't name. There was something profoundly healing in the way their broken pieces seemed to recognize one another. One morning, Clara noticed that Mr. Hale's notebook, always clutched close, was open beside him. The pages were filled with fragments of musical notes, small sketches of waves, and words written like lyrics. But there was something haunting about them. Each one ended abruptly, as if unfinished. "Why don't you complete them?" she asked softly. He smiled faintly. "Because I'm waiting for the right sound to return." "From the sea?" she teased. He didn't laugh. Instead, he looked at her with eyes that carried something she couldn't name. "No, from somewhere I can't explain yet." Clara tried to brush it off, but that night she couldn't sleep. His words lingered, waiting for the right sound. It was as if his music had been trapped between worlds, waiting for something, or someone, to unlock it again. The next morning, when she arrived, he was already humming a tune she didn't recognize. It was faint, broken, like a half-remembered lullaby. But it drew her in. "What's that song?" she asked. Mr. Hale looked at her, almost startled. "You can hear it?" She frowned. "Of course. You're humming it." He smiled slowly, almost sadly. "No one else ever could." Clara didn't know what to say. A chill ran down her spine, though the sun was warm. He changed the subject quickly after that, offering her coffee as if nothing unusual had happened. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something beneath their daily meetings was shifting, something unseen yet deeply familiar, as though fate itself was humming along with them. The sea shimmered brighter that morning. The air felt charged, and when he looked at her, it wasn't with the eyes of a stranger anymore. It was as if somehow he had been waiting for her all along. The next morning, the pier was empty. The wind howled stronger than usual, scattering the waves into silver foam. Clara waited with her sketchbook resting on her knees, her fingers growing numb as the minutes passed. But Mr. Hale never came. For the first time since they had begun their strange, comforting routine, his bench remained vacant. Worry settled in her chest like a stone. She told herself he must have fallen ill, or perhaps simply needed a day's rest. Yet deep down, she knew something was different. The melody he had hummed the previous morning had stayed in her mind like a whisper she couldn't silence. It replayed itself over and over, soft, melancholic, and eerily familiar. Unable to shake her unease, Clara followed the only clue she had. The faint sound of music she thought she heard when she passed the old seaside cottage. A weathered building on the edge of the cliffs, long abandoned since before she'd moved to town. That morning, as she neared it, she froze. A piano was playing inside. The melody was unmistakable, the same one Mr. Hale had hummed. It echoed through the broken window frames, tender and sorrowful, the kind of music that spoke directly to the soul. Clara hesitated only a moment before pushing the door open. The cottage was dimly lit, dust floating through the air like tiny ghosts. And there he was, Mr. Hale, sitting at an old upright piano, his fingers trembling over the keys. He didn't look surprised to see her. "I shouldn't have played it," he said quietly, not where anyone could hear. Clara stepped closer, her heart pounding. "It's beautiful. Why hide something like that?" He gave a weary smile. "Because it's not mine." Not entirely. When he said that, she felt a strange chill crawl up her spine. "What do you mean?" Mr. Hale sighed, pressing one last soft note before turning to face her. This song came to me in a dream, years ago before Eleanor died. I used to think she was the one I heard singing it, but after she passed, the melody returned, changed, fuller, as if someone else was trying to finish it for me. He looked at her then, and in his eyes, she saw something unsettling, recognition. I stopped playing it because the dreams began to show me things, faces, one in particular. Clara's breath caught. A face? He nodded slowly. Yours, she froze. Mine? That's impossible, is it? His tone was gentle, not mad, but sorrowful. You told me you came here to remember who you were. But maybe, Clara, you didn't come here to remember. Maybe you came here because you were called. The air felt heavier. The wind outside howled through the cracks of the old cottage, blending with the faint echoes of the piano. Clara shook her head, half laughing, half afraid. That doesn't make any sense. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes reflecting both fear and wonder. It doesn't have to. Sometimes the soul remembers what the mind cannot. For a moment she stood in silence, her pulse thundering. Then, almost without thinking, she touched the piano keys. The instant her fingers brushed them, the melody continued, as if guided by something unseen. Mr. Hale's eyes widened. You know it, he whispered. Her hands trembled. I've heard it before, in dreams. They played together, a harmony that rose and fell like the tide, ancient and familiar. It was as if two halves of a single song had finally found each other after being lost in time. When the final note faded, the air was electric. Neither spoke for a long while. Then Mr. Hale said softly, Now you understand why I come here every morning. I'm not waiting for peace. I'm waiting for the day the song finishes itself. Clara stared at him, her throat tight. And what happens then? He gave a faint, almost bittersweet smile. Then perhaps I'll finally know why you've come back. The morning after the song, Clara couldn't think of anything else. The music had carved itself into her soul. Every note still lingered in her chest like a second heartbeat. She barely slept, replaying the way Mr. Hale had looked at her, like he already knew her from another lifetime. When dawn came, she rushed to the pier. He wasn't there again. Instead, the wind greeted her with the scent of salt and wet wood, and a faint whisper of waves brushing against the pillars below. For a long while she sat alone, staring at the sea, her sketchbook unopened. Something inside her pulled her toward the old cottage once more. She didn't know why, only that the unanswered questions tugged at her stronger than fear ever could. When she arrived, the piano stood silent in the dim light filtering through cracked windows. Dust motes danced in the air, and on the stool she noticed Mr. Hale's leather notebook lying open. Mr. Hale? She called softly. No answer. She hesitated for a moment, then approached the notebook. Its pages were filled with handwritten compositions, half-finished melodies, sketches of waves, and what appeared to be letters, written but never sent. One page caught her eye because her own name was written across the top. Clara. Her breath hitched. The ink was faded, the paper yellowed and fragile, as though it had been written decades ago. She turned the page carefully and began to read. My dearest Clara, if you ever return to the pier, you'll know why I waited. You said the sea remembers everything. Perhaps it remembers us too. I still play your song every morning, hoping the wind might carry it back to you. Clara froze. The letter was dated April 3rd, 1974, more than 50 years ago. Her mind reeled. It couldn't be her. She hadn't even been born then, and yet the words felt achingly personal, as if written to her, not just someone who shared her name. She skimmed through more pages, and her heart began to race faster. Each letter was addressed to Clara, describing her smile, her sketches, her habit of sitting on the pier every morning, drawing the sea and the man who played for her. Her hands trembled as she turned the final page. At the bottom, written in the same elegant script, was a line that made her knees go weak. If she ever returns, she won't remember me. But I'll know her by her art. She'll draw me before she ever speaks to me. Clara staggered back, her pulse pounding. The memories came rushing in flashes, images she couldn't explain. A wooden pier, the sound of piano keys, A man's laughter mixing with the wind, a promise whispered under the rising sun. Her voice cracked as she whispered to the empty room, "No, this can't be real." But as if in response, the piano emitted a faint sound, the same haunting note that had opened their song. It was impossible, yet undeniable. She turned as the door creaked open. Mr. Hale stood there, pale and trembling, his eyes wet with something between sorrow and revelation. "You found it," he said softly. Clara clutched the notebook to her chest. "Who wrote these, Mr. Hale? Who was she?" He took a deep breath. "Someone I lost a long time ago. Someone who painted like you. Someone named Clara." Her lips parted, but no words came out. "I wrote to her every day after she vanished," he continued, his voice breaking. "The police said she drowned during a storm, but I could never find her body. And every morning since then, I've come here, waiting for a sign that she might return." Clara felt the world tilt beneath her feet. The waves outside crashed louder, as if echoing the pulse in her chest. "You think I'm her?" He shook his head. "I don't think, I know. You came back with the same hands, the same eyes, the same sketchbook that always drew me before it drew the sea." She wanted to deny it, but deep down, something inside her stirred, like a memory too long asleep. And as the wind swept through the broken window, carrying with it a faint hum of their unfinished song, Clara realized the truth might be deeper than logic could ever reach. Some stories weren't just lived once. Some found their way back again. It rained for the first time in months. Heavy, relentless, cleansing. The sea roared beneath the pier, its usual calm replaced by fury. The sky was a bruised gray, thunder echoing across the cliffs like distant drums. Yet despite the storm, Clara walked to the pier, her clothes soaked through, the wind tugging at her coat. She didn't care. She had to see him, had to understand. The night before she had hardly slept. The letters, the song, the impossible truth. They had tangled together in her mind until she could no longer tell dream from memory. Who was she really? Was it madness, coincidence, or fate? When she reached the pier, the bench was empty. But on it lay Mr. Hale's leather notebook, soaked but untouched by the wind, as if the sea itself refused to take it. Her trembling hands opened it, expecting more unfinished songs or cryptic words. Instead, she found a single new page, written in fresh ink that hadn't yet run from the rain. "When the storm comes, I'll play our song one last time. If you remember me, if your soul still knows mine, follow the music." Her heart stopped. Without hesitation, she turned and ran toward the cliffs, where the old cottage stood battered by the storm. Each step splashed through puddles as lightning cracked across the sky. When she finally reached it, the door was wide open, and inside the faint, haunting melody echoed through the rain. The piano played. Clara stepped in. Soaked and shaking, Mr. Hale sat at the piano, his back to her, his hands moving slowly across the keys. The song filled the air, not broken this time, but whole. Every note seemed alive, shimmering with light even in the storm's darkness. "You came," he said softly without turning around. "I read your letter," she whispered. "And I remember, bits and pieces. Dreams, maybe. The pier, your song." He smiled faintly, his reflection visible in the cracked mirror above the piano. "It's all right if you don't remember everything. The soul does what the mind cannot." Clara stepped closer, tears mixing with the rain. "Why now? Why me?" "Because it's time," he murmured. "The sea brought you back when I was ready to finish the song. But I won't be here much longer." Her breath hitched. "What are you saying?" He turned toward her then, and she saw the truth in his eyes. His face was pale, his movements slower, his breathing shallow. The storm outside wasn't the only ending that loomed. "I've been fading for a while," he said softly. "This body, this time it's run its course. But the music kept me here. The promise of you kept me here." She fell to her knees beside him. "No, you can't just leave." "Not now." He smiled gently and placed her hand over his heart. "You already lost me once, Clara. You don't have to lose me again. This song, it's our bridge. When it ends, we'll meet where the sunrise never fades." The piano's final notes rang out, tender and slow. Lightning flashed through the shattered windows, illuminating them both. And then silence. Mr. Hale slumped forward, his head resting on the keys. The final chord lingered in the air, vibrating with the power of all they had been. Love, loss, time, return. Clara sobbed, clutching his hand. But as the storm began to fade, she noticed something strange. The rain no longer fell on his skin. It was as if the world itself had stopped touching him. And when she looked up, the piano keys moved one last time, pressing themselves softly to play a single perfect note. The wind carried it out the open door, across the cliffs and down to the sea. When Clara stepped outside, the first light of dawn broke through the clouds. The storm had passed. The pier below glistened like silver, and on the horizon, for just a moment, she thought she saw him, standing in the golden light, smiling as the sea breeze carried their song into eternity. The storm had passed, but the world felt different, quieter, gentler, as though the sea itself mourned in silence. The air was cool and heavy with the scent of rain-soaked wood and salt. Clara stood on the pier at dawn, her hands trembling as she held Mr. Hale's weathered notebook against her chest. The sky blushed in hues of pink and gold, and the tide whispered beneath her feet like a secret only she could hear. It had been 3 days since the storm. 3 days since she had found him lifeless by the piano, his final song still echoing in her mind. The villagers spoke softly about it, calling him the old musician who finally found peace. They said he died smiling, as though he had seen something beautiful in his last moments. But Clara knew better. He hadn't just found peace, he had found her, even if it was only for a fleeting heartbeat in time. Now, every morning since his passing, she returned to the pier at dawn, just as they always had. The bench where he once sat was empty but not lonely. His presence lingered in the soft rustle of the waves, in the golden shimmer of the sunrise, in the faint notes that sometimes drifted on the wind when everything else was still. That morning, as the horizon brightened, she opened his notebook again. Most of the pages were smudged with rain, but on the very last page, one she swore hadn't been there before, were fresh words, the ink still dark. Tomorrow, when the light returns, so will we, her breath caught. She traced the letters with her fingertips, half afraid they would vanish. The handwriting was unmistakably his, but how could that be? He was gone. Clara closed her eyes and let the sea breeze brush against her face. The sound of the waves deepened, blending with something softer, something familiar, the faint melody of their song. She opened her eyes, and there on the horizon, sunlight spilled across the water like liquid gold. And then she saw him. Mr. Hale stood at the end of the pier, his silhouette framed by the rising sun. He looked younger somehow, his silver hair gleaming like the dawn itself. He smiled the way he always had, gently, as if he'd been waiting for her. Clara blinked, her heart thundering. "Mr. Hale?" she whispered, her voice breaking. He extended his hand, just like he had in her memories, the same hand that had once guided hers across the piano keys. "You kept your promise," he said, his voice soft but clear. "You came back." Tears blurred her vision as she stepped forward. "Is this real?" He nodded, his smile both sorrowful and radiant. "Everything real begins here." As she reached for him, the wind picked up, swirling around them. The world seemed to dissolve into light and color, the sea, the sky, the pier, all merging into one endless horizon. For a moment, she wasn't sure where she ended, and he began. The melody rose again, fuller and richer than before, played not by piano keys, but by the heartbeat of the world itself. Together, they stood at the edge of eternity, watching the sun rise higher. "I thought I'd lost you," she whispered. "You never lost me," he replied. "You just had to remember." Their hands touched, warm, solid, real. The light enveloped them completely, wrapping them in gold. The waves stilled, and in that moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, as the sun climbed into the sky, the pier was empty once more. Only Clara's sketchbook remained, resting on the bench, open to a drawing she hadn't made. 2 figures standing together at sunrise, their hands entwined. Beneath it, written in his familiar script, were 4 words that glowed faintly in the morning light, until the next dawn. The sea sighed, the gulls cried, and the first full light of morning bathed the world in warmth. Somewhere beyond sight, beyond time, a melody played softly, their melody, echoing through the waves, and for the first time in years, Clara smiled without pain. She understood now that love, when true, does not end. It only changes form, flowing like the tide, returning again and again, with each sunrise eternal.